Hello, Cleveland, and welcome to another edition of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jackson McCurry, and joining me again in the studio today is Jack Duffin of the Paul Brown International Browns Podcast. Jack, how's everything going, buddy?
It's going really well. So, no, it's all shaping up for me. That sort of 2 weeks into March is the most exciting time of the year. It's more fun than the draft. It's more fun than Super Bowl night. It's just anarchy. The phone just goes absolutely mental for 2-3 days, and it's genuinely exciting.
No doubt about it. And like today, there's been like the last couple of days, like more moves are starting to happen. You see teams are starting to maneuver like how they're going to construct their roster. You're seeing releases, you're seeing contract restructures. I mean, business is starting to pick up in the NFL, and we're inside 2 weeks before free agency starts. I mean, it's starting to get back to like football's back, time to start talking about it more and more, and just moves are starting to be made. And like, was it yesterday the Steelers got Ben Roethlisberger's contract done? We can actually touch on that if you'd like to. He took a big pay cut. I mean, that was probably the biggest thing. He went down. I think he's only making $14 million this year. They restructured the deal to where they can now strategically restructure other guys' deals and still, create a window to where they can add talent. And Ben and his contract's so fascinating because it's a 1-year deal. It automatically voids, but then they're taking like $2.5 to $3 million dead cap hit for like each of the four following seasons. So it's a fascinating deal. Reminds me of the Nick Foles deal when he was with the Eagles a couple years back, but the Steelers got it done, and now they have a chance to add talent, surround talent with him, which could be the swan song for Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so they're always going to move money into future years, and the way it's structured, it's got those 4 fake void years on the back. So what will happen, say he retires after this season, which I think you genuinely expect, is all 4 of them void years will land onto the 2022 salary cap. So it's just over 10 million that will land there. But the one fascinating thing, because there was always the expectation that 41.5 million, I think it might be 41.25, was always going to be pushed back. That there was 22.5 million that they couldn't move, but all the rest, they'd turn it into a signing bonus, push it as far back as it'll go. And it just made sense. There's no point with a reduced salary cap taking it this year when you can push it into next year. He retires, you've probably got, say, a rookie QB on the roster. The one interesting thing was the fact that he took a pay cut of about 4 million, which was the real surprise. So they must have sort of driven a hard bargain with him and said, look, hey, if you're not willing to do this, we'll probably just cut you and take the 22.5 million on the nose and we'll walk away. Because otherwise, there'd be no real interest to sort of force him to take a pay cut. So, no, it's really, really interesting to note. And, it's his final year. Obviously, had one hell of a career. But it's going to be interesting because, in a way, we actually want them to play semi-decent. We don't want Ben Roethlisberger to have a nightmare this year, because if he has a nightmare, they might be picking top 6, top 8, and they've got access to potentially a quarterback that then sets them up for the next 10, 20 years. So we're actually hoping that Big Ben can get a good sort of 7 to 9 wins. So not threatening the playoffs, but not near the top of the draft. So good luck to Ben. Just do enough. That's all I ask.
Absolutely. I mean, just be good, except, the 2, maybe 3 matchups that the Browns and Steelers will have. And when we play them, then Myles Garrett and whoever's joining him on the defensive front gets after him and rattles him up. But speaking of whoever's joining Myles Garrett, one player is technically guaranteed to come back. The Browns did make some roster moves today. Before we recorded, they tendered Porter Gustin, one of the edge rushers, as well as tight end Steven Carlson. They were both exclusive rights free agents, so the Browns pretty much slapped the veteran minimum, or the league minimum, on them for another year. They can sign it, they can hold out, it's up to them. But exclusive rights free agents, for those that don't know, they are guys that contracts expired, but they have less than 3 accrued NFL seasons, so the Browns can they're exclusive rights free agents. They can only negotiate with the Browns, and they can pretty much get whatever the Browns give them, which is the league minimum, not the veteran minimum. But Carlson and Gustin were two guys when we did the roster deep dive. We expected them to be with the team at least through training camp. Gustin had more of a role last year on the team than Carlson did. So I would say Gustin is safer at the moment, but both guys are guaranteed to be here at least, through training camp. Jack, do you have any thoughts on them tendering those two players?
Yeah, so there's no guarantees on these guys. They can walk away from them at any time, but they're just at least bodies that are back for camp. What regularly happens is some teams, they'll just tender all of their exclusive rights free agents, and then after the draft, when they're signing their guys to get all the way up to 90 men, and they're bringing in UDFAs that they're actually more excited about than these guys, they'll just then cut them. But they've obviously seen enough. Just the fact that they've announced 2 in one go, it probably means George Obina and Brian Allen aren't coming back. So they'll now become UDFAs and then be able to sign with anyone. But no, I would expect Gustin to make the roster. Carlson, he's a fantastic special teamer, and I think they're happy with him as tight end 4. But at the same time, if they see someone, say, on day 3 of the draft, then they could easily go that route, and he's just bounced off the bottom because, yeah, you need a long-term answer. But we're going to go into more of that later.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and going to Porter Gustin, like, I still have hope for him. Like, he didn't wow anybody. He didn't have any sacks. He only had a couple QB hits, but like, you can see the potential in him. And obviously the Browns like him because they gave, and especially the defensive staff, they gave him more of a role, I think, last year. And he stepped up. He did pressure quarterbacks when he got his chance. Yeah, he didn't wow people the way he did when he came in at the end of 2019, when he did make some flashes. But I think learning behind Myles Garrett and Olivier Vernon and even Adrian Claiborne, like, I think Gustin knows, like, and I think he knows that there's the potential's there. And I think the Browns believe that the potential's there. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him in year 3. And what they bring in to the edge rusher room, because we know Olivier Vernon likely won't be back. Adrian Claiborne's future's up in the air still, even though we're 2 weeks out, he could be cut. But, there's Myles Garrett and there's Porter Gustin, and now you just have to see what they're going to fill in between those guys.
Yeah, he was comfortably better than Adrian Claiborne. And if you're thinking, hey, Myles is here, they're going to bring in a free agent, they're going to bring in someone in the draft. Well, that's 3 dudes. And then you're looking at, hey, do you want Claiborne on 3 million? Well, they've got a 3 million option on him. Or they bring in Porter Gustin at, like, I don't know the final figure, say 750,000 roughly. Yeah, I'm taking Porter Gustin all day long. It's not a hard choice there between them two. And then, yeah, you've obviously got the wild card of Weaver. They might pick someone up else on day 3. There's loads of different things that could happen because, yeah, there's lots of hype around Weaver, quite rightly, but at the same time, he's never played an NFL snap. So it might be a complete disaster. But yeah, if you're looking between sort of Claiborne and Gustin, yeah, Claiborne played 534 snaps to Porter Gustin's 390, but Porter Gustin's just better. He's obviously much younger. There's hope for him, whereas Adrian Claiborne is obviously fixed more to one side because of the injury in the past, but he flashed loads in those first 2 games. And then other than that, there was only 2 more games that he really played well. Whereas Gustin showed a lot more promise across the whole season. So for me, yeah, bring me back Porter Gustin. Probably not going to be here long term, just purely because unless they can give him a little bit of money and they're happy with him being like potentially like edge 3 on sort of 2-3 million, there's not really a route there that you go, hey, we're going to have Myles and we're going to have a guy on a rookie deal just because Myles' contract's so big. Do you have an acquirer? Do you have a Porter Gustin? That's sort of a debate you get into at a later time. But yeah, he obviously he's a bit boom bust, but no, overall happy with how he played and looking forward to what he can do next season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would take the potential with Gustin over Adrian Claiborne, who's on the back end of his career. He's not like he did flash a couple games, but you go with the younger guy, you go with the guy that's got more upside, and that would be Porter Gustin at this point. The other move that the Browns, made / didn't make, and I know this is breaking your heart, Jack. They did not tender an offer to special teams ace Tavierre Thomas. It's first reported by, I think it was Tom Pelissero from NFL Network, but Tavierre Thomas was a stud on teams. He even started a couple games at corner because of injury, but the Browns, if they would have tendered him, he would have become a restricted free agent. But I think because of the salary cap, because there's moves that have to be made, and potentially the Browns see better players out there at the cornerback and the quarterback position. And as much as Tavierre was a stud at special teams, he had his moments as a cornerback when he had to get thrust into that role. But they're letting him hit the open market. I think there's a shot he could come back. I know we talked about it before the show, Jack. You said maybe like a 1-year deal with $1 million, guarantee him a little bit of that, but they're essentially letting Thomas go and see what he can get. I think other teams will view him as, 4th, 5th, 6th corner on their roster, just like the Browns do. And I think they've seen what he can do on special teams for sure. But I feel like the Browns might think there's something better, but I think they're also open to letting Thomas go out and see what he can get. And if not, they'll bring him back and stash him on the roster.
It's just time to get rid of Andrew Berry. You can't be doing stuff like this to me, Andrew. It's it cuts deep. No, to be fair, when you're looking, if you're carrying, say, 11 DBs, you don't mind 10 and 11 being special teamers, really giving you that upside. We said sort of pretty much from day one of the off season, if we're looking at these restricted free agents, are you paying them sort of over $2 million each? The answer's probably no. Hodge, you could probably look at maybe is worth that, but the rest of them, and you've seen other teams, you've got Hilliard with the Texans, who's agreed a deal at sort of $1.5 million, I think that works out at, might have been 1.35, where they're not actually wanting to give the tender level, but they're willing to find some level under that, which works for both sides. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've said to Thomas, hey, we're not going to activate you. We're going to allow you to test free agency. They might have already put an offer in front of him and gone, look, we'll give you 1.1 million. There'll be 100,000 of that guaranteed. So even if we get rid of you after camp, you've got 100,000. That could easily be something they've done. But we'll find out. Also from the other angle, if they go, hey, we're going to carry 11 DBs, we want all of them to be able to play because of the injuries and stuff they suffered last time. And you've got Delpit that has not played a snap and you don't know. You've got Greedy Williams obviously coming off an injury. You really don't know where he's at. You've almost, those question marks means you've got to have the bottom of the roster able to step up. And however much I love Thomas and his special teams play is phenomenal. He was always one of the first players to the ball every time it went downfield. If you're there going, hey, we want to carry these guys and we need some more depth, because if Thomas is on the field, it's not good. And yeah, I can understand where they're coming from. So it's a shame. But when you've got people like Carlson, you've got some other dudes, as long as you've got enough special teamers, it don't really matter.
Without a doubt. We just got actually a little breaking news. Von Miller will not be charged now. I know there was a criminal investigation going against him, and he has been tied to the Browns. So it'll be interesting to see what the Broncos do with him now. I know he has an option, but he's been a darling of Browns Twitter as a potential target to get opposite Myles Garrett. Jack, what's your thoughts on Von Miller? Would he be somebody you'd be open to the Browns getting if the price is right? He does have an option, so he could become a free agent. If he were to become a free agent, would you be open to bringing him to Cleveland?
Yeah, it'd have to be a free agent. And to be fair, I've got no issue with him. I think you could probably view him in a similar breadth of like your Melvin Ingram. Obviously, Von Miller's a bigger name, but it's the sort of player, even like your JJ Watt in a way, where you can go, look, let's bring him in, 2-year deal, and almost what you're losing. I'd have no issue not giving him as much money as JJ Watt, because I don't think you want to go that high. But I think you could certainly look in that sort of 10 to 12 range and go, look, we'll give you 2 years and make it guaranteed. I don't know what his market's going to be like, and that's sort of the big unknown. But there's certainly a route where you look at a player like 4 million and you're like, yeah, I'll have that guy on my team. Because why not? He's a talented dude. So no, I could certainly see it. It's the sort of bridge. Ideally, Vernon would have been healthy. They signed Vernon up 2 years, say 15 million, and we're never having this discussion. We wouldn't have even been in the JJ Watt sweepstakes. This whole thing would have passed by, and we're like, no, we've got our dude, and it's awesome to have him locked in. But unfortunately, yeah, any option on the table, I think they'll be happy to look at.
Definitely. And, the thing is, like, I feel like anybody that was in on JJ Watt would be in on Von Miller. The thing is, he had an injury last year, did not play at all in 2020. So you would think his price will come down a little bit because of that. And the fact that he's about to hit 32 years old. But, I mean, you look at what JJ Watt just got, a 2-year deal, $23 million guaranteed. I mean, I think Von Miller can definitely get that. Like his numbers, the way he's been dominant on defense, coming out the same year as JJ Watt, like their stats are right on par with each other. So I feel like that would be the starting point. 2 years, $23 million guaranteed. But I definitely think that if the Browns were interested in JJ Watt, and there's the mixed reports of they offered more than the Cardinals, they didn't offer more than the Cardinals. It's going to come down to money, even though anybody will say, well, I want to win. It'll come down to money. The Browns have money right now. They can create money. I definitely think if Von Miller becomes available, the Browns will be players in that market, to say the least.
Just on the
go ahead.
JJ Watt more money, and no real details actually came out on this, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's just journalists almost trying to pull a fast one that the Browns offered some 3-year deal and claim it's more money because it's a 3-year deal rather than a 2-year deal, because it's one where, yeah, if the Browns offered, say, 40 million over 3, and then the Arizona deal was 32 million over 2, that they go, oh, the Browns offer more money, and it's like, yeah, not really. It's why, especially with these older players, you look at that guaranteed money and sort of the knock-on guarantees as well, because if it's structured in such a way that you pretty much have to keep them for 2 years, then you're effectively guaranteeing it all, whereas you can have someone else where it's a 1-year deal and there's just option years on the back.
Yeah, I think the original report that said that the Browns and the Colts both offered more money than the Cardinals came from a reporter in Phoenix. So that kind of told you, like, yeah, this is a little suspicious right out the bat, because now they're trying to pull a fast one, like JJ Watt took less money to come play with in Arizona, which isn't really a Super Bowl contender. So, yeah, I mean, the Browns may have offered a 3-year deal. The Colts may have also offered a 3-year deal, and it technically was more money. It just wasn't more guaranteed than what the Cardinals offered. So, yeah, it was. I think it's reporters just trying to set an agenda, like always. But the main reason why we sat down to do a pod today was David Njoku has been the hot topic all week as it pertains to the Browns. We know he asked for a trade last summer. He said some things to Jim Rome during Super Bowl week, talking about, his role with the team and whether or not he would be back. And of course, Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry met with the media this week, and they both said that there's a plan and a role for David Njoku. And, Kevin Stefanski seems to be really high on him. And many can argue that Njoku was the best tight end in the Browns room last year. He did take a lesser role, obviously, because they paid Austin Hooper a lot of money. They drafted Harrison Bryant in the 4th round. But when Njoku was on the field, he was impactful, especially the playoff game against Kansas City. He improved as a blocker. So, Jack, you wrote an article laying out all the options that the Browns have right now. And because there was the rumors about Kyle Rudolph, Mary Kay Cabot reported that Kyle Rudolph has interest in joining the Browns. So quickly everybody was like, well, that means we'll trade Njoku. So you wrote an article, laid out all the options that the Browns have as it pertains to Njoku, and you laid out some good ones, and you also mentioned some free agent possibilities. So let's go ahead and talk about that article and talk about the options that are out there for the Browns and Njoku as well.
Yeah, we've got 5 different options, but we'll touch on that second. I think the first thing is to basically look at the Browns, how they use tight ends and other stuff like that, because naturally people are going to think, hey, it's a 2 tight end offense. They're going to have 2 tight ends out there like 80+% of the time. And the answer is just no. Just looking at the sort of splits, we'll go through the breakdown like this first, but the other way will probably be best. But 0.4% of the time they've got no tight ends, 50.6% of the time they've got 1 tight end out there, 34.2% of the time they've got 2 tight ends, 14.6 is 3 tight ends, and 0.2% of the time is 4 tight ends. If we break that down into the numbers, they've got 1 or more tight ends out there 99.4% of the time. They've got 2 tight ends out there. It's just 49% of the time. So that is the second most in the NFL behind Tennessee, but it's still less than 50%. So 1 out of every 2 snaps, they've got two or more tight ends out there. And that's sort of a really important thing to note. So obviously that 99.4% of snaps where there's 1 tight end out there, it's obviously not the same tight end every snap. But in the theory of it, your tight end 2 is probably somewhere around 50% of snaps. And that naturally creates an issue that, well, what do you do with that second tight end? And 3+ tight ends, 14.8% of the time, and that is the most in the NFL, which was the Browns. But if we're looking at that and we're sort of thinking, hey, where's the sort of division on this? If you're looking at like tight end 1, say 80% of the snaps, tight end 2 about 50% of the snaps, and tight end 3 about 25% of the snaps, well, there's only really the money to pay 1 dude. And especially when we start looking at the receiving stats and sort of looking at that group and sort of where they rank. So looking at sort of targets, receptions, yards, and TDs, Hooper was 16th in the NFL in targets, receptions, TDs, and then 22nd in yards. Bryant then was the next tight end for the Browns, and we're only looking at regular season stats here. And Njoku, yes, had a bounce in the playoffs, but the thing you got to remember when teams are looking free agency, and you might be thinking, well, why do the Browns care about what these guys get in free agency? That's exactly why Njoku wants out. Njoku's out isn't, I don't want to be in Cleveland. It's, I want to earn a life-changing amount of money for myself, my family, generations to come. And while you might have a lot of tight ends in the Stefanski system, it's not a highly productive tight end system. It's not one where you're going to get your Waller, your Kelsey, your Kittle numbers. It just doesn't get that style of production from what we've seen in the first 2 years. So Bryant, 37th on targets, 40th on receptions, 44th on yards. Njoku, 44th on targets, and that's 44th out of all tight ends in the NFL. 48th in receptions, 46th in yards. So there's not much of the ball going around. And that sort of draws me to the point of, before we get into the different options, it's really key to understand they're not going to commit big money to 2 tight ends after this year. Whatever happens this year, fine. In a year's time, they're not going to extend Njoku and be like, yeah, we'll have Njoku and Hooper. Because that's sort of where the issue comes down of they've got to make a choice, whether it's now, whether it's next off season. Because lots of people are like, well, the upside's massive for Njoku. He's really young. Quite frankly, age doesn't matter. If in a year's time they're having to go, well, we're keeping Hooper or we're keeping Njoku, the fact that one's younger, you're not betting on the upside at that point. You've got to have seen it. And that's sort of setting the table of, it's going to come down to a choice either this off, not so much this off season. They don't have to make a decision this off season, but next off season, it's a Hooper or Njoku game. And that's a very, very realistic discussion that they're going to have in the front office, and they might make decisions a year early on that, and we'll break down the 5 options. But that's just the really important point to understand when people are like, well, we'll just keep Njoku. You can't just keep everyone. And are you going to pay, say it's $8 million a year in Njoku, just to pull that number out of the air? Purely, who knows? are you going to pay $8 million a year potentially to a dude that's going to play about 50% of snaps? The answer is just no. It's just not realistic when you've got so many other positions you want to pay. It's like, would you pay Wyatt Teller or would you pay David Njoku? You're not paying a tight end 2 over your starting guard.
Without a doubt. I mean, and I like Njoku, and the social media, like the arguments get started when people talk about, trading Njoku or trading Odell or anything. And it's like, and I even brought this up to somebody that was like, why are we getting into these debates? And I'm like, these debates need to be had. Like, they are just fair conversations to have at this point. We're not keeping everybody. And like, I feel like everybody gets invested into these players, and I get it. Like, I do too. Like, I like Nick Chubb, I like Jarvis Landry, but I know that in a year's time, both of them could be off the team because, unfortunately, like when it comes down to it, if we're building a winning team, and Andrew Berry and Stefanski say, "Hey, we'll be fine if we get rid of such and such player," well, yeah, I'm gonna hate that they got rid of such and such player, but at the end of the day, if the Browns are a consistent playoff team and have a chance to win the Super Bowl every year, then I'm going to trust the people making the decisions at the end of the day to make the decisions that they feel is best to help the Cleveland Browns. If they win, then they're great moves. If they lose, we'll berate them on this podcast. We'll berate them on social media, and maybe they'll get fired, just like everybody else that's come through the doors of Berea. I mean, it's just is what it is at this point, and it's fair conversation to have. Like, we're going to debate like this stuff on the podcast because they are discussion points. Like, people come in and listen, and then they want to comment on it. They'll comment on it on social media, and they'll hear us out and tell us we're wrong. But in a year's time, we might be right.
Yeah, and it's lots of people don't understand. These are exactly the same conversations that they are having in Berea. They will have put every single player probably on the roster and had a lengthy discussion on every single one. We're talking from Baker Mayfield down to Tavierre Thomas. All of them they'd have had a decent discussion on. It wouldn't surprise me if we're talking like potentially like several hours on Baker Mayfield. Yeah, it might only be 30 minutes on Thomas, but everyone they're running a fine line through. Then they're having a deep discussion on like nearly all the guys in free agency. Then yeah, they'll get onto the draft after that almost, but they are going to be a very, very thorough organization. So we've got 5 options. I'm going to start with the first one. So it's keep Njoku for 2021 and then let him hit free agency. So he's obviously on his final year. It's his 5th year option. It's $6 million. When the season starts, it's fully guaranteed. Yeah, he's only going to play roughly 50% of snaps, we reckon. It's value. Don't get me wrong. Look, Stefanski's scheme, even though the production of tight ends isn't massive, the role of tight ends is big. You've got to have quality depth because Hooper could go down in camp. Hooper could go down week 1. You've got to have guys that it's all right them sitting there and throwing out the tagline next man up, but quite frankly, if you had a younger core there behind sort of a Hooper and Hooper goes down, then you can't just expect like Harrison Bryant to step up the next day and be your tight end 1 for the entire season and have a tight end 2 that's coming in who might be Stephen Carlson and then playing 50% of snaps. It'd be crazy. So the gist is, hey, you let him hit free agency. They probably play free agency right next year. Depending on what he gets, you're talking about a 5th or a 6th. And lots of people are getting excited on the higher end. And I think the issue is if Njoku is almost only playing that sort of 40 to 50% of snaps, you're probably only getting a 6th because he isn't getting the chance to show off his skills, pack up like all those massive high stats. The team's probably not going to need to invest that much money in free agency to get him. So while lots of fans can see the boom and the really exciting part of Njoku, he caught 19 passes during the regular season last year. 19. That's not a guy that you're going to pay $8 million to in free agency. So yeah, that is option 1. And obviously you don't have to make that decision on free agency until next offseason, and we'll get onto that in option 2.
Yeah, I think, option one seems to be one of the most plausible out of the five you laid out. Yeah, somebody got into a debate with me yesterday talking about, well, what if we just let Njoku play the season out and then, we'll get a comp pick. And I think people don't understand the compensation pick, like the way it works. And that's fine because I don't either. But if people think like we're going to get like a third or fourth for Njoku, like right now, I don't think that's very logical. I would think a fifth or sixth at the highest. But yeah, I don't see us getting a high one. Let's go ahead and go to option two.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Touch on comp picks quickly. So if Njoku went and signed like a 20 million deal next offseason, yeah, you might get a third. That's what it's going to take. And basically how comp picks work is for every player you lose, you get so many points effectively for like, oh, he's played this many snaps across the next season, he signed this deal. And then for everyone you then sign in free agency, it balances out. So if you might let if Baker Mayfield, say, walked at the end of his deal and signed the biggest deal in free agency anyone's ever signed, massive. If you then at the same time, say, Deshaun Watson hit free agency and you signed Deshaun Watson to the second biggest deal ever seen in free agency, they're just going to balance out and you won't get a comp pick. And that's sort of how it works. It's a crossing off exercise. And Nick Coate, or just Google over the cap comp picks, loads of awesome information there. But the Browns won't be qualifying for anyone this offseason because no one's really hitting free agency of note. Next offseason, who knows? But it's certainly going to be something they're really going to engage in this front office. But option two is basically the other side of option one. Keep Njoku for 2021, extend him, and then cut or trade Hooper next offseason. So you're going to wait right until the end of this next season. Then you're going to go, actually, Njoku's outplayed Hooper. He's the one that we want to keep. So to do that, we're going to extend Njoku, and then we're going to turn to Hooper and go, look, you're out. I'm guessing if you go that route, it's probably a case of Hooper hasn't played amazing, so it's probably a cut rather than a trade. The trade would only be $9.5 million for 2022, 2023 for the new team. So it's not a horrible deal. Where Hooper's deal is backloaded, though, people will look at it and say, hey, that's $11.25 million of dead cap. Why we wouldn't want to do that? It's just purely how the deal's structured. There's not any guaranteed money left there. That's all money. He's been paid that cash in his first two seasons. And how they did the deal, it was effectively a $23 million over two deal with two option years at $9.5 million on the back end. But rather than giving that $23 million on the cap over the first 2 years, they got that all the way down to 11.75. So it's basically his salary for the first 2 years. They've just heavily backloaded it. So, yeah, it would look like a high dead cap charge, but quite frankly, they've got enough wiggle room that they can make it work. So it's certainly a plausible route. And it's one where, hey, option one, option two, we're making the option this year of like, hey, let's keep him. And then next offseason, you decide, hey, let him hit free agency, or actually let's bring him back and move on from Hooper.
Yeah, this one is the other one that makes the most sense. Looking at the options for Njoku, like if he goes out, has a great year, just shows that he's worth the money that he could get on the open market. And let's just say Hooper doesn't perform very well. I think Barry and company would just have no problems, wiping their hands, saying the Hooper deal was a mistake, trying to trade him, and saying, Njoku, you're our guy. We want to invest in you. We want you to stay at Cleveland Brown. I can definitely see this option happening as well. Let's go to option three. This is one where you say we trade Njoku and then we go out and sign a veteran. Now, I did mention Kyle Rudolph, but you also laid out some other potential veterans that could be out there on the open market to accompany Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant and Steven Carlson in the tight end room.
Yeah, so the key part of this, and lots of people miss it, it's not get rid of Njoku and upgrade with Kyle Rudolph. That's not the debate we're getting into. What you're looking at is a 2-for-1 deal almost here. You're going, let's trade David Njoku. And the two names I use in the piece, and what I'm looking at with these trades is we're not going to keep... So the mentality will be, hey, we're not going to keep David Njoku next season because we're committed to Hooper. So let's look out there for another team in the NFL that's got a dude that they're not going to commit to long term. So two guys that I pulled out that they're realistic here is Michael Gallup. They've got Cooper that they're paying, so he's probably not staying there long term. He actually dropped in snaps last year, which was shocking because he's a really talented dude. And then you've got Gilmore for New England, the final year of his deal. They upped him last year just to keep him happy, but yeah, he's not hanging around there. So they're two guys that they could go to and say, yeah, they might need to put a little bit of picks and stuff in there to make it work. But both have got tight end need. New England had the lowest amount of snaps of any tight end in the NFL. It was crazy. I think it was 13 catches or something across tight ends for their entire season. They could pick up the phone and go, hey, we're going to send you Njoku. You give us a player, we'll throw in the pick or we'll do a pick swap of something. And that's when you then go, right, let's go and sign someone else. Because if they look at their numbers and go, we reckon it's going to be a 6th round comp pick, if you can get something that you think is worth a 4th round pick or a 3rd round pick of value in this trade because you're getting Michael Gallup, say you're giving up a 5th and David Njoku for Michael Gallup, predicting trades is the hardest thing you can ever do in the NFL. But if that was the offer, you're thinking, if I phone them up and offer them a 5th and a 6th, are they going to give that for Gallup? No. If I offer a 5th and Njoku, will they do it? Yeah, they want to do that. Let's do it. Because what you're getting for that, and then you can add in a free agent that more or less fills out Njoku's role anyway. And the reason why I've thought, hey, you want a 1-2 year veteran, it's because you've got Harrison Bryant that you like as well. So you might not want to turn around to Harrison Bryant yet and go, right, you're number 2. We're really happy with you. So the guys I looked at after Kyle Rudolph that you mentioned before is Jared Cook from the Saints, Anthony Ferkser from the Titans, and Trey Burton from the Colts. So they're all players that have performed solidly. Jared Cook's obviously the biggest name there. The other two guys are just, they're solid. Kyle Rudolph makes a lot of sense, but it's tough to know where his market will be because he's literally just arrived into free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I put out the poll a couple days ago on our Twitter account, and I put, would you guys, hypothetically, would you trade Njoku and a pick if it meant getting a defensive playmaker? I didn't even mention Michael Gallup because I wasn't thinking offense. I was thinking more defense. And 86% of the people who voted yes. So I feel like people like Njoku, but if we could take him and flip him for a playmaker like a Gilmore. I mentioned Lattimore just hypothetically, but I know the Saints have cap issues. They probably won't be taking on a $6 million guy like a Njoku, even though they need tight ends now because they just got rid of some. But it's a hypothetical. If we could do that, like you said, if Njoku's only going to net us a 5 and a 6, if we take Njoku and a 5 or Njoku and a 4, and we're able to get somebody like a Gallup or a Gilmore, I think you do that all day, every day.
Yeah, and it's just sort of throw the ridiculous hypothetical out there that if you were sat there in a case and someone phoned you up and say, oh, hey, I want to give you 2 firsts for Baker Mayfield and Deshaun Watson's currently free agent in the NFL, you go, yeah, I'll give you Baker Mayfield for 2 firsts. I'm going to sign Deshaun Watson instead. And yeah, you'd probably be the other way around and you'd be slightly devaluating at quarterback. But it's that sort of debate that you're going, hey, we're going to trade a dude and then we're going to bring in someone basically just as good as him, and that's all fine. And that's sort of what you're looking at of like, hey, Rudolph might leave you in a year's time, but you've gone and got the production of Njoku for a year and you've basically traded for something that is valuable and you can extend. And it might be, hey, you bring in Gilmore and you don't extend him, but at least there's a route to Stephon Gilmore getting extended. There's a route to Michael Gallup getting extended. Unless you're cutting Hooper, there's not sensibly a route to Njoku getting extended. So it's just an important thing to keep an eye on, because the last thing you want is, hey, both of them play really well, and then you're sat there in a year's time and, yeah, you're getting rid of Njoku and you're just getting a comp pick, whereas, hey, I'd rather have Michael Gallup.
So option 4 that you wrote about was trading Njoku still, but this is one where it's bold. It's definitely unlikely, but you say go out and sign one of the big name tight ends. Now, before you explain, just there's two big free agents out there at the tight end position. There's Hunter Henry from the Los Angeles Chargers, and then there's Jonnu Smith from the Tennessee Titans. Like, I don't know if this would happen, but it would certainly be bold, and it would cause some headlines because the Browns would be shelling out big money towards a tight end for 2 off seasons in a row, which I don't think any NFL team has ever done.
Yeah, so this one could be really, really interesting if they did do it. I would much prefer Jonnu Smith. I think Jonnu Smith is an absolute stud. So the idea would be, hey, let's go and get a big name tight end. We'll trade Njoku and we'll sign Jonnu Smith. And then what we're going to do is we like Hooper, but Hooper's not awesome. So we'll cut Hooper in a year's time because you're not going to keep 2 of these guys. But if you're like, we like Hooper, but Hooper's not the game changer that we hoped he'd be, let's go and get Jonnu Smith because we think this guy's the guy. You're going to have 1 year where, you've got Jonnu Smith and Austin Hooper. So the production should be incredible. You've got 2 tight ends, and you'd probably end up increasing that tight end 2 usage from the 49% nearer the maybe 66%. Who knows where that would go? But yeah, if you're looking to upgrade, be aggressive, because if you really like Jonnu Smith, and I mean really, really like Jonnu Smith, you're unsure on Hooper, we could be sat here in a year's time playing devil's advocate where they go, they don't like Hooper, they don't really impress with Njoku, or Njoku gets some more injuries this year, and we actually just move on from both. So this could be almost the opposite end of that, and going, hey, let's go bold, be aggressive, as Andrew Berry likes to say. Let's get Jonnu Smith on $12 million a year, and we'll trade Njoku this year, and we'll just cut Hooper next year. Because even though they're in a really, really strong position, having Hooper, Njoku, and Bryant, we could be here in a year's time and Bryant's the only one on the roster. So if you fall in love with a star and you can get Jonnu Smith and you really like Jonnu Smith, be bold. Why not? It's outside the box. It's certainly the least likely of the 5, but I felt it was worth including.
As we've seen over the last few years, this front office is not afraid to be bold and out of the box. Option 5, this is our last one. It would be trading Njoku this year because they love Harrison Bryant. Now, Harrison Bryant's shown some flashes last year. He's definitely has to get more consistent catching the ball as well as controlling the ball. He did have some fumbles as well, but you can see the potential there. I think he had 3 or 4 touchdowns as a rookie, which was phenomenal. They could look and say, hey, Njoku, we like you, but we're not going to give you the money we want, and we love the upside of Harrison Bryant to pair up with Austin Hooper. And then you even mentioned, Jack, in this scenario, you'd go out and sign a veteran, and it's an interesting veteran as well.
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 different directions you can take with this. You could bring in the veteran and bring in that sort of guy at tight end 3. So the name that really stood out for me, he finished as PFF's number 2 tight end last year. You're thinking, wow, that guy's not going to be a free agent you could bring as your 3rd tight end. Could be. So he played 274 snaps. The 2 years before that, he's played a total of 53. And that is Richard Rodgers from the Eagles. He was just really, really good. And yeah, obviously it's a risk to bring in someone like that. It's not like your Carl Rudolph where you're like, hey, we know what Carl Rudolph can do. We've seen it. But I think that's an interesting one. Or it could be the direction of they wait during the draft or after the draft and they like someone on day 3. They could like someone as high as sort of the third round, and they're like, this is a tight end that we really, really like. We want him. And they could just go, hey, we're happy to move on from Njoku. We've got Bryant stepping up. Bryant got more receptions, more targets, more yards than Njoku last year during the regular season. So it wasn't like he was a tight end 3 deep on the roster. I think that certainly could be the case. And to be fair, no one expected anything out of Harrison Bryant last year, quite rightly, because tight ends as rookies don't tend to do too much, especially on good teams. So no, this is sort of, I don't think completely unrealistic. They could like Bryant and they could be happy to take that risk. But yeah, it would intrigue me if I could get Njoku in the Gallup trade, then the person I would most go after, for me personally, I'm willing to risk it on Richard Rodgers. And then I wouldn't mind even drafting someone as well, because then I love Carlson, but if they fall in love with someone on day 3 at the tight end position, Richard Rodgers, day 3 pick, Harrison Bryant, and Hooper, give me that room and let's roll.
It wouldn't be a terrible option, to say the least, if they went that route. Rodgers is he's a good tight end too. Obviously, I don't think you can count on him to be a tight end 1, but he can definitely play a complementary role. Jack, as you look at all the options, which one do you think is the most logical, and which one would you do personally if you were Andrew Berry?
So I think option 1's where they'll go. They'll keep Njoku for the season and then let him hit free agency. I'm a Jonnu Smith lover, so part of me says, hey, let's go bold and bring in Jonnu Smith. Trade for Michael Gallup, bring in Jonnu Smith, and let the baby roll, because that is going to be fun. And Michael Gallup is a player I would happily extend long term in Cleveland as one of my 2 wide receivers.
What about you? I mean, I would say probably option 1, but option 2, you definitely keep in mind, just because I like Njoku. I've definitely gone to bat with him several times, even though last summer I was really ticked off when he asked for a trade, but I get who his agent is. I know he's trying to make his money. I can't fault players trying to make their money, but definitely option 1, I would keep Njoku back, but obviously keep option 2 open. And much with you, if they can pull off a trade to bring in, say, a Michael Gallup, or on the defensive side of Stephon Gilmore, or some other kind of player that would bolster that defense, you definitely keep that in mind as well. Definitely go check out Jack's article here as you look at all the options. It's in depth. It's very thorough, as Jack always does with his work over at thedogland.com. Jack, you want to go ahead and plug everything else you've done recently over at the Dogland, and any potential upcoming pieces you have as well before we get on out of here?
So I don't have anything at the edge of my fingertips that I'm writing at the moment. I've got a couple of things bubbling away in the brain, but not entirely sure. But as always, guys, you can check me out at the Paul Brown podcast. We podcast 15 minutes, 7 days a week. So a perfect little episode, whether it's on the commute to work, it's a 15-minute break during the day. You can just slot it in anywhere. So, check us out there. It's on my Twitter. It's on all podcast networks. So, no, that's there. And all the writings at the Dogland. So check them out, because there's so much there, especially with all the crazy cap stuff you're going to hear of, like, what's a backloaded deal? What's void years? Why have we converted base salary into signing bonus? All of them pieces are there. So whenever it is in the off season, crazy deals start happening for the Browns, jump on the Dogland and the article straight and be there. And one thing I will say to you guys, it's going to happen across free agency. It takes 2 to 3 days for the actual deals, or the terms of the deal to come out. So when you're like, oh, Jack, what's this deal mean? What's this deal mean? And when I'm like, hey, we just need to wait. We don't know, because you'll get the headline numbers. We got the headline numbers for JJ Watt's deal. They're nothing like what's actually really happened. It's 4.6 million in his first year. Whereas when the numbers break, they give you all sorts of different stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of days, I've had people argue with me saying the Browns have 30 million or they have 50 million in cap space. I go and I copy and paste your articles, the links, and I say, here, study up on your cap knowledge. I'm not trying to be a dick, but this is the actual numbers. Jack does his homework, or go to overthecap.com. No offense to the other side said, talk about cap space and salaries and all that. Over the Cap is the most accurate and up to date when it comes to NFL salary cap and all the roster moves. As soon as they get them in, they go ahead and update all the cap tables. It's solid work. That's where Jack gets sources most of his stuff in his articles when it comes to salaries. That's the go-to site. But Jack has pumped out some great work over the last couple months in terms of off-season roster deep dive, proposed contract extensions, and then his articles about how the cap works, how you can manipulate the cap. It's all there. It's all over at thedogland.com. Definitely check it out. And also follow us on Twitter at The Dogland. Check us out on Facebook at The Dogland. All our work is posted there as well. You can follow me personally at Jack McCurry08. And as we get on out of here, until next time, As always, go Browns.
Go Browns.